Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. I'm Ted Yacucci. Well, this is the cover-up, the JFK assassination cover-up. And really, this is part two of our first video, which was titled Hour by Hour, What a Good or Even Decent Detective Would Have and Should Have Picked Up and Done in the first couple of hours of the JFK assassination. But today we pick it up a little bit further than that, and we look really at the massive cover-up that was so obvious from the beginning, because we're going to look at things like why the false pictures from Mexico City of a fake imposter Lee Oswald came in right away from the CIA to the FBI. We're going to look at why there were two Lee Oswalds arrested at the Texas Theater. One brought out the front and one brought out the rear entrance. We're going to look at why there was a wallet found at the Tippit murder scene and handled by Lieutenant Westbrook with Alex J. Hidell and Lee Oswald identification inside, and then this wallet just totally disappears and is never explained. We're going to look at why Lee Oswald had two torn dollar bills on him when he was arrested at the Texas Theater, as if he was going to match it up with someone that he was meeting from intelligence. We're going to look at things like what was really in the Lee Oswald note that was dropped off to the FBI for Agent James Hosty. We're going to look at things like all of the ridiculously incriminating, obvious evidence that was coming out of one place, the Payne household. And we talked about last video, why weren't they separated right away? Why weren't they considered possible conspirators? We would have learned so much if we had actually had an interrogation of both Ruth and Michael Payne right away, right? Okay. We're also going to be looking at what Lee Oswald was actually doing in jail the days that he was there. He wasn't just sitting in jail. Remember, he would have known after that midnight news conference that he was a patsy, right? And then we're also going to take it all the way up to 4 days after the assassination, in which NASAM National Security Action Memo 263, which would have kept us out of a war in Southeast Asia, was changed to 273, which guaranteed the Vietnam War. We're going to look at all of those things. All right, let's look at 10 of the facts that we were able to deduce in our first video on the cover-up. And number one, there was no audio recording, no stenographer, no notes of the Lee Oswald interrogations. That's absolutely ridiculous and never should have happened. Number two, no investigation of Roger Craig and whether he really saw Lee Oswald getting into that green Rambler station wagon. Roger Craig and Lee Oswald were together. And we know that Oswald commented on what Craig said. He said, "Don't bring Mrs. Payne into this." Well, the next obvious question would have been, Lee, did you get into that Rambler station wagon? But according to what we know, that question was never asked. Why? Number three, there was no clarification on whether the weapon, the rifle, was really a Mauser or a Mannlicher Carcano. We know that Seymour Weitzman and others filed affidavits the very day of the assassination saying the rifle they found on the sixth floor of the depository was a Mauser, and they saw the stamp on the barrel. Yet Lieutenant Day of Robbery and Homicide changed it later in the day to a Mannlicher Carcano. Why wasn't that determined the very first few hours of the investigation? That was the so-called murder weapon. And of course, it would have been if it was a real and true investigation. Number three, why weren't people really detained and questioned thoroughly in Dealey Plaza? People like Jim Braden, who was in the Daltex building, why weren't they detained and really interviewed to find out what they were doing and who they were? Number five, there was no immediate investigation of the reports coming out of New Orleans that there had been a plot that started there. And that started right on the first day with Jack Martin, who worked for Guy Bannister. That started right on the first day. So why wasn't there a co joint investigation that would have started right away in New Orleans, where we would have found out so much about what Lee Oswald really did and his connections with intelligence? Number six, there was no investigation of the file contents from the Payne's household that was acquired by Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters. And we know that those file cabinets held index cards and other information about pro-Castro sympathizers in the Dallas area. And that tells us that the Paynes were almost certainly intelligence assets. Number seven, why weren't Ruth and Michael Payne separated for questioning? Why wasn't Michael Payne asked about his interactions with Lee Oswald? He would have had to say that he had taken Lee Oswald to six or more meetings over the past 2 months. Number eight, there was no, as we just said, interrogation of Ruth and Michael Payne separately. They were allowed to come into the police station and just give some statements Friday night, the night of the assassination. Number nine, there was no closing off of the Payne household. There was no thorough search. If there had been, we would have either found or not found all the things that Ruth Payne would say she came up with later. Things like the trinkets from Mexico City. We would have found whether there was really a note in a book that Ruth Payne was returning to Marina Oswald that did or did not hold a letter supposedly written by Lee Oswald claiming responsibility for the General Walker shooting. Number 10, there was no photograph taken of some of the most important evidence there was, and that was the supposed bullet that would become CE 399 found at Parkland Hospital. How could there be no photograph taken of evidence that was so critical to the investigation? Okay, enough of the recap stuff. Let's get to the new stuff. And the first thing that we have to look at, of course, is that there were two Lee Oswalds arrested in the Texas theater. Why wasn't that examined and analyzed right away? Not one, but two men, both listed as Lee Oswald, will be arrested in the Texas theater only an hour after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. Really? Lee Oswald will be identified in 1 hour as the man who shot the president and killed Officer Tippit? And then not one, but two Oswalds will be arrested in the same place? The Texas Theater? Lee Oswald will be arrested on the first floor and brought out the front of the theater, and the second Oswald arrested in the balcony and brought out the back door. This backdoor arrest will be covered up for decades, and no information supposedly exists in official files about the second arrest. Okay, so this is one of the most straightforward examples of something obvious that just wasn't examined or explored or investigated. And that is that there were two men arrested in the Texas theater, both identified as Lee Oswald, the Lee Oswald that came out the front with the famous photos that we know, and another Lee Oswald arrested in the balcony and taken out, arrested in the back, and left in a police car out of the back entrance of the Texas theater, witnessed by Mr. Burroughs, the candy seller, witnessed by Bernard Hare, a hobby shop owner of two doors down from the theater, and a whole bunch of other people who thought for years that that was the only Lee Oswald. So why, with all of the reports that were written officially, affidavits that there was a second Oswald arrested, why was it not explored? Next, we move to the wallet that was supposedly found at the Tippit murder scene, found by Reserve Officer Kenneth Croy and handed to Lieutenant Westbrook. Croy will miraculously find a wallet with Lee Oswald and A.J. Heidel identification, which he turned over to Westbrook, but this wallet will later disappear into thin air. The official story, like the second Oswald arrest in the Texas theater, will just disregard the fact that this second wallet was ever found and in Captain Westbrook's possession, stating that all evidence was lost. Westbrook will later be outed as a CIA operative and be sent to Vietnam as a CIA contract agent supporting the Saigon Police Department. Is Westbrook and Croy's conduct all through the assassination day just coincidence? And just like that disappearing wallet supposedly found at the Tippit murder scene, what happened to the two torn half-dollar bills that were possessed by Lee Oswald in his real wallet when he was arrested and brought back to Dallas Police Headquarters? And next we move to what did Lee Oswald really do when he was being held in the Dallas City Jail from Friday through Sunday morning when he was killed as he was being transferred to the Dallas County Jail. And in order to answer this, we have to go back to the summer of 1963, about 4 or 5 months before the November assassination. And we have to remember that Lee Oswald was pretending to be pro-Castro and he was handing out leaflets on the streets of New Orleans. And he had a supposed run-in with anti-Castro Cubans, which was almost assuredly set up. But what happened was Lee Oswald was arrested. And what did he do immediately upon his arrest? Well, he asked to speak to someone from the FBI. And amazingly, John L. Quigley, an FBI agent, immediately went to spend time with Lee Oswald in jail, spent over an hour with him, and then all of a sudden Lee Oswald was arrested, and it comes out that Quigley said that he destroyed all his notes, and no notes from that meeting were ever available for the Warren Commission or anyone else to investigate. Well, we know that when Lee Oswald would have been in jail in Dallas after the assassination, after that midnight news conference with Henry Wade, he had to know he was the patsy. Now, what was he doing? Sure, he wanted to hold on to his intelligence front if he possibly could. He would have been hoping that he could just be let go and, everything would kind of just be forgotten and he could go on with his intelligence work. Initially, I'm sure that's what he thought. But after he knew who he was being set up by as a patsy, don't you think he was asking over and over to have someone from the FBI who he was working for as an undercover agent? Don't you think that he was asking over and over to have someone from the FBI visit him? Of course he was. Of course he was. Just like his phone call to whoever that Hurt person, Mr. Hurt in North Carolina, was never put through. Certainly, no FBI agents ever visited Lee Oswald in order for him to come up with a plan of moving forward. I'm sure he thought that he would finally get to that point after his transfer to the Dallas County Jail, but of course, he did not live to see that. Okay, now we're still as we were doing in part one of this video series, we're still pretending that we are good, honest, true detectives. So we're looking for what should have been done, right? All right, so now we're up until about the early evening on the day of the assassination. Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters has already been to the Payne household. He's already come back to Dallas Police Headquarters with the file cabinets and all of the index cards of the pro-Castro sympathizers. Now, he actually gets a call at that point from his mother-in-law, who tells him that there has been a group of anti-Castro Cubans that have been renting a home right near her on Harlandale Avenue in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. And so he immediately goes to check it out. And what he finds is that for the last 2 months or so, all of the anti-Castro groups that have been kind of kicked out of Miami, Alpha 66, the student directory groups, all of the more radical groups have kind of headquartered there at this house at Harlandale Avenue in Dallas. And he finds out that they all kind of left about 2 or 3 days before. Now, this is absolutely amazing, especially if you consider that the leads are already coming in the same day, the day of the assassination, from New Orleans. So if this stuff had been followed up even to a small degree, it may certainly have led to an understanding that intelligence groups running these anti-Castro Cubans were certainly involved with the assassination. And again, at the very least, it would have given all honest investigators a lead that there may be intelligence pressure to either limit or completely quash a real investigation. And what I think is one of the most incriminating and important revelations of the entire JFK assassination, the FBI will tell the Warren Commission they did not investigate the Harlandale Avenue house because they thought it was spelled Hollandale and they just couldn't find it. Now, this brings us up to the night of the day of the assassination, November 23rd, 1963. And what was the big event or the big occurrence then? Well, it was that the CIA sent from Mexico City pictures and voice recordings of who they said was Lee Oswald, who they say had visited Mexico City just a month or two before. Now, it turns out, of course, as we all know, that the pictures weren't of Lee Oswald and the voice recordings weren't of Lee Oswald. So, what does that really say? It really says that anyone who was going to investigate the actual assassination of the President of the United States, remember, this isn't anyone just normal. This is the president. And you've got the two leading intelligence agencies in the entire country that are sending false information about the absolute only suspect that has been arrested in the murder of the president. Well, this has just got to scream that something is going on. And the thing that had to be going on was funny business by the intelligence services, which would have suggested to anybody with an IQ over 25 that they were actually involved. Guys, there's so much to get to. I think what we'll do is take one more, and then we'll, just so the video doesn't get too long, we'll end it after the next one, and then we'll pick up the rest of the weekend in a final video in this kind of little series. But the one thing that I wanted to talk about was that Saturday afternoon, the next day. And what do we have there? Well, we have District Attorney Henry Wade and we have Jesse Curry, police officer Jesse Curry, both putting out statements of false content about Lee Oswald. Let's look at just some of the tall tales District Attorney Wade was telling reporters with absolutely no proof, no evidence, and no attribution. This feature article appeared in the LA Times on Monday with information from Saturday and Sunday. Wade states that Oswald got on a bus and told a man the president had been shot. When a woman passenger asked Oswald if it were true, he told her, "Yes, the president is shot," and laughed wildly. What? The Dallas News, in revealing the existence of a map Oswald had drawn of the president's motorcade, quoted its unnamed source. This was a map of the city of Dallas. Oswald had placed marks at major intersections along the motorcade route, 3 or 4 as I recall. There was also a line from the Texas School Book Depository building to Elm Street. This was the trajectory of the bullets which struck the president and Governor Connally. This map is believed to be the major evidence which Police Chief Jesse Curry reported earlier that officers had uncovered. Henry Wade is telling the press, and he won't say where he got the information, but he'll say that he's got a map showing the Texas School Book Depository and the trajectory of the bullets from the 6th floor window to the limousine. And he is associating that with Lee Oswald. That is printed on Monday in the LA Times, and we've talked about that in a previous video. Jesse Curry is telling people that there is absolutely no doubt that Lee Oswald is the only suspect. He's the guilty person. And he's telling people that the next day, I'm jumping ahead here, but this will be the same guy that is telling people the next day that Jack Ruby is not known by 3/4 of the whole entire Dallas police force. Okay, so you've got 2 guys that are putting out intentional false information. And if Lee Oswald hadn't been killed on Sunday morning, all of that those false documents, that false evidence that Henry Wade is referring to with the trajectory from the bullets, what do you think they would have done? They would have just created it. Someone would have sat down and drawn it, and then they would have said that was found in Lee Oswald's apartment or whatever, okay? Because remember, he wouldn't tell people on that Saturday. He wouldn't say where he got the information, right? But he said he had it. So that is just, again, it just screams that it's a massive cover-up, and any normal human being who is a detective, an investigator, someone honest and true, would have seen right through this stuff, or at least had questions. And why was the press publicizing why were they printing this stuff without any kind of normally when you print something, you have to be able to say where it's coming from. Where are you getting the information? It's called attribution. I'm going to attribute this to this source, right? But they're printing it, and it's not attributable to anyone. They're just saying that Henry Wade had it. Well, how could they print that? Oh, it just gets my blood boiling when I think back and you look at all of the incidences, and it should have been such a screaming fire alarm at each one of these over that first day that we just didn't get. It's amazing. Oh, well, we have so much to still talk about. The palm prints, right? With Lieutenant Day coming up with the fake palm prints that the mortician will say, no, they came in Sunday night, and it's right away they took the palm prints. We're going to learn about all of that stuff. We'll talk about NASAM 263, and we have a lot more to get to. We'll do that in the next video. Thanks so much for being with me. Please subscribe if you haven't. We'll see you next time.